story, but unfortunately,
The moon again, right?
I only find a way of finding
So much, whatever the narrative is, whatever the truth is, at the end.
moving around a little bit, but basically Sydney and Melbourne were down over the last month in March, just slightly, 0.1 and 0.2. But of course, Brisbane, Adelaide, and Perth, very strong. And interestingly, this chart just shows, this is the one that Westpac produces based on the Catality data, showed the differential moves between Sydney and Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Hobart, Canberra, Darwin, and regional areas, and how different they are in different locations. Another way of showing the same data is actually this one here that shows the deviation from December 2019. And it's interesting that on this analysis, dwelling prices in Perth have now outpaced national average by around 42% since December 2019, while Melbourne has underperformed by 26% over the same period. So the point there is that, you've got to actually be very discriminating in terms of where you look and what you look for. And if you are in the fortunate position of holding a property that's actually desirable, sometimes the best thing to do is to hold the property because it will still be more desirable in the months and years ahead. And just on that, I just want to bring this one up because I don't know whether you saw this. This was actually cross-posted from Property Forum. This is actually basically saying, I'm coming in with a PR visa. I've got some savings. I'm now going to get the first homeowner grant, and then I want to buy an investment property later. So I want to highlight again, there are people migrating into the country and using the government-backed schemes to be able to get into the property market. So, whilst everybody's saying, we don't know what's going to happen, there is still demand. And a lot of that demand is coming in from the migration programs and the government stimulus programs that actually are supporting it as well.
100%. This is where people have got to be, as I said, they've got to put the big boy pants on and they've got to start taking into account all the data points that are at play. It's not just one thing, and it's not just the boomers, and it's not just one government policy, one talking about this or talking about that. You've got to take into all the data points that are at play in order to try and get some sort of light at the end of the tunnel, because it's the markets are moving on a week by week basis in some areas. They're moving very, very rapidly because of the scarcity and because people don't want to shift and they don't want to move for various reasons which we've discussed. Schools, hospitals, all those amenities. They've grown up in the area. They don't want to retire 50 kilometres, 60 kilometres away from the grandkids, and they can't downsize. All these things that we've often talked about, and this is where I'd say also be very, very careful, and we need to be very vigilant as to, we might have a bit of a lull in the market, and you might call a 0.2% drop according to Catality and everybody else, and a 0.3. Where is that drop in general terms? Where? Can you please show me? I mean, there's some Domain, Sydney Morning Herald reports that there was a 4% drop in the last quarter over the properties in the eastern suburbs. What part of the eastern suburbs? What area? What type of dwelling dropped 4%? In the same article, they also talked about a 3 to 4% rise in properties in the southwest region and in the northwest region. So there's so much flying around. There's so much noise that it's sometimes it's somewhat farcical sometimes reading some of these articles. But that's why we are here. That's why we're having the ranch. That's why you and I have also got our side hustles, and apart from sharing information with our followers and our viewers, we've got our respective jobs and other things that we do. But look, going back to the point I was saying earlier on, and that is, we've still not yet seen the mass return of expats. We don't know whether it's going to be 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. A lot are talking about moving to Singapore. Well, you can buy in Singapore if you want to pay something like 60% in stamp duty before you get a small apartment, and that's really on a leasehold. Then they're talking about other Asia Pacific countries as well for all sorts of various reasons. But at the end of the day, I believe that that we're going to get a lot more people that have been in your UAEs, in your Middle East, in your South Asia Pacific regions coming back, and that's going to be a big shock to the system. But right now, I mean, the articles that you hear, they're talking about drops and this and that, and you're talking 0.2% that was tallied over a whole month. I mean, what's that? That's in comparison to where how some markets in Sydney moved 20-25%, and we were watching them rise last year by up to 25% within a 6-8 week period after the enunciation of the 5% government scheme deposit schemes and everything else. So then when you've got other people that have that have recently obtained PR and are coming, and they're talking about they're not coming in with $10,000, $20,000. They're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars and they're not only looking at buying a property, but now they're also already thinking about and making projections about investing in real estate. What does that tell you? What are people abroad reading, seeing, and hearing about our markets? But again, unfortunately, and it's as much as I love Australia, as much as I'm passionate about Australia, and as much as I'd like to just keep it to ourselves, but there's a lot of other people out there that have got eyes on us, that have got deeper pockets, and the government is not going to pull back on immigration. Because the last article that you spoke about there with regards to the cost of construction and what that's going to do, when you start reading between the lines and you start reading, reading the article and you start reading between the lines, two major points come out of that. One is, when all the builders, the majority of the builders, the trades are going into infrastructure works and are going into commercial and are going to be pulled into government infrastructure works. I mean, and because they see a safety net there, the safety net that they no longer have with residential contracts. Who's going to build? Who's going to build the residential developments? Who's going to have the balls or the cojones to develop them and to build them? Given the fact that the costs are going up astronomically. So when you start reading between the lines, Martin, that jumps out, and what jumps out is that the government have got no choice but to import more people on the guise of skilled workforce in order to build. They've really got no choice, right? They're not going to push back on student visa holders. Not going to push back on that, because the universities, the chancellors, the vice chancellors, and all the secretaries won't let them. And the universities and the tertiary educations have got they're a big lobby group, and they're lobbying very, very hard, and they're not going to let them. So not only that, but once the ones that are here, they're primed, and they've got pathways to they've got a number of pathways to residency apart from asylum. They'll get bridging visas. Don't forget, once you finish your degree here, if you finish a bachelor, you get an extra 3 days. If you go to a master's, you get an extra 3 years. If you finish a master's, you get an extra 5 years that you can work here. And then if you go to a doctorate, you get an extra 6 or however many more years. So this thing's not going to pull back. In terms of the immigration, is not going to pull back. And now that we're in where we are, as I say, I'm very much a believer that we're going to see the golden visas come back in as well. They won't call it that. Obviously, they'll call it something else in the guise of something else to hoodwink the general public. But this is where we are. And now, no local builder. Based on what's happening over the last month, I mean, local builders are just absolutely scared of contracts, and because they don't have a safety net. There is no safety net. There is no, like, the good old rise and fall clause that used to be in the contracts. I mean, once the fixed price contract came in, and then there was contracts, building contracts got tightened up, and there was more of a push to protect the consumer. Now the builders are on the edge, are on thin ice, and a lot of them will go broke over the next 3 to 6 months because of the fixed price contracts that they gave pre the shit show that we've got in the Middle East at the moment, and the fuel prices, and to have my electrician, one of our electrical teams, told me on Friday, their prices are going up by 27%. By this week, everything across the board, 27%. So when you've got materials climbing by upwards of 25-30%, then your labour costs, and then your fuel and everything else. So when you start baking all that into the costs, so read between the lines. Expect more people, apart from PR holders and expats returning from those troubled areas.
Yes, and I do think that is a very important point about the costs of construction continuing to rise, which is going to put more upward pressure on new builds, and particularly, I think, some of the high-rise stuff, which is already, I think, priced extraordinarily high for